Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Evolution of the Workspace, Preparing for the Next Generation event. I thank you so much for joining us today. I can assure you this is going to be a great event. My name is Megan Lance, Vice President with HIT Contracting and Secretary of the Education Committee of our Mid-Atlantic chapter. So before we get started, I thought I would mention a couple of upcoming programs that I know that you don't want to miss. Take a look at these and please check out our chapter website to register. All the registration events are open for that. And then also want to make sure I thank all of our annual sponsors. Thank you very much to the Education Committee and then also the Young Leaders co-chairs who made this program possible. I know they've worked tirelessly to put this program together, so we're really excited to have a special conversation. So today we are going to have a conversation with our future young leaders as they're going to share their thoughts on where they see the workplace shifting and what they hope companies include in their office environments in the future. So please submit your questions for Q&A into the Q&A session, and the panel will answer most of the questions at the end of the program. We'll try to get through as many as we can. So now I would like to introduce our moderator, Stephanie Jenkins, as past president of Cornet and head of workplace solutions at Capital One. As Vice President of Capital One, Stephanie Jenkins leads Workplace Solutions team, which manages Capital One's global real estate portfolio, workplace and digital experience, workplace analytics, building operations, and the environmental sustainability office. You are in great hands with Stephanie, and so I will turn it over to her.
Thanks so much, Megan. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Excited to be here today and get to hang out with the Cornet family this morning. Hopefully everyone has some with you. I think it's going to be a really rich conversation. So before we meet the panelists, let me just set some context about what we're going to be hanging out talking about this morning. So I'm sure a lot of us know that by 2025, millennials and Gen Zs will make up over 85% of the workforce. Now, those of us in the 15%, we may be a small number, but we're mighty but few, right? But we're not here to talk about that. This next generation has already begun to enter the workplace, and their viewpoint has a very real impact on how future workplaces design, all of the tools in it will function. So the members of these generations are assets, and industries will be shaping the future of workplace around recruiting and retaining these age groups. This panel, as we're about to learn and meet, features young leaders within the industry discussing their observations, their assumptions, kind of their perspectives and hopes for what this future holds. So let's do that. Let's meet our panelists right now. So as I said, this is a rock star group, so I think we're going to glean a lot of great information from them today. To start, we have Anna Robedek. She is a PMO project manager at CBRE on the Microsoft account. We have James Chrysos. He is the manager real estate projects at GDIT. We have Kelly McCutcheon. She's the assistant real estate portfolio manager at Open Society Foundations. And we've got Ramza Khan, the studio manager at Ware Malcolm. So, or Malcolm, my apologies. So a great group of folks, lots of different aspects of the industry right here before us. So let's not waste any more time and we'll jump in. Now, I know for the last 15 months, we've been talking about COVID. So I am sure that you guys would like to continue the conversation on COVID. And so just to really, really meet that need, scratch that itch, that's what we're going to do. We're just going to have a quick conversation, kick off with COVID, just to kind of ground and actually build the foundation of thinking kind of COVID has accelerated the workplace flexibility. So what do you think will be a lasting effect on our industry because of COVID? Why don't we start with you, Kelly?
So, as you said, it's really kind of accelerated, I think, a lot of the changes that we were already starting to see slowly take place in the workplace, especially as it pertains to technology and access to the work that we do. I do think that we will see this continuing trend of increasing flexibility with the workplace. So, with the ability to work remote, I don't think it's going to be something that's so taboo to ask for anymore with new employees that are signing up with teams. They're going to want to say, is it an option to have 1 or 2 work days from home? And it really starts to ask this bigger question of what is the purpose of the workspace, I think. And so I think as, throughout the course of COVID, we really start to see that work can carry on even if we aren't in a brick and mortar location. So I do think that we're going to start to see it's no longer going to be these designated seats that people have to sit in. It's probably going to be more designed towards collaborative types of work and just flexible work environments in general.
Awesome, Kelly. Yeah, I think it's a great, you've called out some great points. Let's see, Anna.
Yeah, hi, good morning. I would just, really underscore what Kelly mentioned about, the increase in flexibility. And I think one thing to highlight there is that it's not necessarily going to be, a one size fits all solution. So, depending on the type of work that you're doing, the type of teams that you're collaborating with, it's not necessarily going to be everyone wants to work remote or everyone wants to come back into the office. But I think having the agility and the conversations around what makes the most sense for your teams to promote that flexibility in the workplace. And then I think Kelly also touched on the need for enhanced technology in the spaces to really enable that hybrid, if part of your team is working in the office and part are working from home or they're traveling, how can we make sure that the conversations and the collaborations don't suffer as a result? And I think technology is going to be a huge piece of that. And I think, one thing I'm seeing with some of my peers is that a lot of people do want to go back into the office, but it's not necessarily going to be Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 every single day. And so again, I think flexibility is going to be the name of the game.
Yeah, no, I think that'll be a word that we hear a lot this morning. Absolutely. And I think things that both Kelly and Anna said, we are going to, I think, unpack as we go deeper into the conversation. But before, Ramza, James, any thoughts from you guys on this particular kind of your predictions or thinking?
Yeah, I mean, something that's kind of already taken place prior to COVID is there are teams that have worked together all over the country and all over the world ahead of COVID. So, having that technology in place to be able to, work together is something I think we're going to see going forward forever. You already said, Steph, like we're going to say flexibility about 1,000 times today. And one of those, pieces of flexibility I think we're going to see a lot coming out of COVID is this idea of, if a Skype call or a Zoom meeting or whatever kind of accompanies any meeting in person, so that if someone can't make it, if someone's elsewhere, if something's going on, I feel like that very easily could become part of just the everyday meeting culture and whatever else is going on. I mean, even just the concept of, as a culture, if you're not feeling well, maybe you're not going to the office that day as opposed to kind of powering through, right? Well, all of a sudden you can get on a meeting, you can still go to work, you can still get things done if you need to, and not bring your cough with you or whatever else,
Maybe there's permission to stay home and actually have a sick day.
For sure.
Well, on that too, I mean, I think that one of the things that really accelerated this year was also us humanizing one another. I think it was a year where a lot of people kind of dogs and, embraced a little bit of life. And so, part of, I think that has extended into even the post-COVID normal, whatever that may be, of like, I do want to kind of be able to take a walk with my family in the evening, for example. And I think, the office and the workplace kind of becomes something that is trying to work more hand in hand with that lifestyle and that changing lifestyle. And I think, looking at it from just that humanized element of it and the reason as to why, right? I don't think anyone has anything personally against going to the office. I think people have just enjoyed having a little bit more control over their life or their balance,
Yeah.
And so I think it allows us to use that as an opportunity to collaborate with one another on multiple levels as well. So, that's kind of I agree with everything that everybody else said here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thanks for spending a few minutes on COVID. And I actually think it sets the foundation beautifully for where we want to go as we look ahead, when we're on the other side of this, which I think we're pretty darn close, which is exciting to think about. So let's actually spend a minute talking about the built space. So, with the hypothesis that we will still use the office going forward. It is still a valuable part of the equation for our industry, but work in general of how things get done. What do you think the purpose and the approach for the built environment will be? And then how do we balance that need, for these types of spaces, interactions, kind of casual collisions, and sustainability versus the cost and the need for flexibility. So Anna, you want to get us started on this one?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we're kind of in this unique space right now where we can reflect on what we did and did not miss in the office space over the last 15 months or so that we've all been working from home. And I think, we've had time to self-reflect about how we use the space and how we're most productive with different types of work potentially that we're doing. So kind of going back to that, not one size fits all. I know for me personally, there's certain aspects of my job that I definitely think I'm more productive at home, others that maybe the office is more conducive to that. And working from home, we have the benefit of not commuting, right? So we have a little bit more time, like Ramza said, to live our lives. And so I think striking that balance is going to be really important. And another thing, that I think I have realized, especially early on in my career, that I used the office for were those relationship building moments. And I think, Steph, you mentioned it, the casual collisions. So we're not just using the office just to heads down do our work, but, building relationships through meeting in the kitchen to grab a coffee, and sort of those mentorship like relationships that you build, especially when you are early on in your career, that I think will be mind as younger generations are kind of infiltrating the job market. And then another thing that I think I heard you mention, Steph, was around sustainability. And I think this is another generational differentiator potentially, that younger generations are really looking at sustainability in our spaces and keeping a lens as we're looking at how spaces are built and how they're utilized. So being really thoughtful with building spaces that are actually going to be used in a productive way that enhances productivity and collaboration within our teams, and maybe not just building an amenity space just to build it, but being really thoughtful about how it will be used to make sure that, there's longevity in a space. So I do think it's going to be an interesting question to see how that lens on sustainability and that desire for more sustainable spaces is going to balance and kind of have that yin and yang with the need for flexibility and more agile workspaces.
Yeah, no, it's a great insight as we think about the desire for kind of how the space is used. You start to see the balance may shift of the types of space. And so, Ramza, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so definitely similar to Anna. And, when you think about the office space, especially from an architectural point of view, this was a question that we got a lot from clients this year with what do we do? How do we pause? And I started to kind of just change the question a little bit. It wasn't really like, what style of chair do you want? Instead, it was who's sitting in the chair? How long are they sitting in there for? Right? So it started becoming this realization of how do we turn the office into something that's more of a safe haven from your home, right? As a designer, I mean, I had materials all over my one bedroom apartment in DC. It just was not realistic. And I almost needed some boundaries around that so that I could be creative in my creative space and then be at home, because I said it throughout this year that it kind of wasn't work from home. It was more like living at work, right? And so when you look at the office, I know from a designer's perspective, our ideal office, actually an administrative amenity space, if you will, because people want to come in to do things that they can't do at home, or they want to come in to have a quick chat with someone, or see some human interaction, or you want your 2 monitors over there without people screaming in the back. And so when it comes down to that, there is an evolution happening in that space that I feel like was happening all along. And I think it was just the gap of it taking 5 years to get there versus now 5 months to get there, right? The influx of spending on technology, right? That might have been something that wasn't factored in before, that now it's like, okay, people need a laptop, people need these things. And so that tactile, and that the purpose really is to support the company and support the brand and the mission, right? You're going to have low impact and high impact. There's going to be a difference between a startup company and a campus, and how that's going to get used. There's going to be a difference between location. There's going to be a difference between privacy. And so all of those things kind of come down to, there's no one answer to it. And the reality is, I do feel like right now we're in a little bit of an experimental phase, right? Researchers are researching and collecting data. And in 5 years, Jim Collins will write another book, and we'll understand what happened with like Twitter versus Pinterest versus, and all these things. So I just think it's going to be about asking questions that are unique to the end user, and how that'll impact their brand, culture, relationships, and kind of who they want to be. So that's, as tactile as I guess it can sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's
for
great.
sure.
No, absolutely. And I think we're hearing it, right? Like we're hearing how the space types or the balance of the workplace sounds like it'll evolve, right? And really creating that community and that ability to network. And so kind of what I'm hearing, from both you and Anna Ramza is, that ultimately young professionals, the workplace is creates the opportunity to make and build friendships through the workplace, right? It almost becomes this work family. And that is how it fosters the workplace, the built environment fosters that. I'd love to, let's kind of dig a little deeper, and James and Kelly, jump in here as well. But as we think about that, is that kind of, you think for young professionals, these generations, the driving force of why you'll go back into the space? Are there other reasons that you think may be there? Or let's go a slightly different direction. Kind of, how do you think that will affect the microcultures of teams?
I mean, I think the connection piece is a huge driving factor. I can tell you pre-pandemic, I had a very flexible schedule with how often I would go into the office and would not. And that would be, of course, dependent on the kind of work that I needed to get done on that day. But the one thing that has really been the missing piece this year is that connection. I actually would go into the office for the focused work because I would, want to have my head in the zone. But then I would appreciate those small interactions of bumping into someone while I was refilling coffee or putting plates away from lunch. So it's really this networking space. And, as a grantee making organization, connection is the big piece, right? So a lot of our spaces are really geared towards bringing people into the space, meeting with them, being able to have those face-to-face interactions and conversations. And so that is what the purpose of the office going forward is really going to be. So now if we no longer need to have these larger spaces that are, siphoned off by levels and titles, and it's more all just designed towards collaboration and working together, it's creating more of an environment that's going to almost like a destination, I want to say, right, for different types of work to be done.
And really you guys have all hit it already, but these face-to-face interactions are key, on multiple levels. There's the networking part of it, the creating the family, creating those relationships, but even just the understanding of getting on the same level as somebody. When we're on the phone with somebody, even on a Zoom call, you have that barrier between you that even if it's kind of subconscious, it is there. When you go and have an opportunity to speak with someone face to face, explain what's going on, level with them, especially tougher conversations, it just humanizes everything, makes those things move a little smoother, and really, I find really helps, achieve a lot of difficult challenges, that we face. So, finding that opportunity to get into the office, meet with somebody, that goes for traveling too, right? If you need to go to another office or elsewhere in the country, getting to see these people face to face really can help drive that, I find. And so, like Kelly just said, like Anna and Ramza just said, like that's what these offices are going to become. Really, I think is going to be these places for people to really make that one-to-one connection and help foster their relationship going forward. So that people that are our age can continue to have the same, or can continue to hear the same thing that we hear a lot of our older peers say when they say, "Oh yeah, I've been working with them for 25 years. They're great." Like we'll be able to say the same thing at that point.
No, it's great. Anna, go ahead, jump in.
I was just going to add to that too. I think the level of collaboration and how we collaborate is going to look a little bit different as well with this hybrid work model. And so just kind of bringing it back to the technology piece. I know for me personally, the enhanced technology in the office is a big reason why I often go to the office. And with teams that sit, in different geographical locations, being able to utilize that for team meetings and increase that collaboration that maybe I can't do at home. Or like James said, if I'm traveling and I can go into a site, it's a little bit easier than, sitting in a hotel room with my laptop. And so I think making sure that technology is evolving with us in these spaces is going to be really critical for this hybrid work model.
Well, Anna, Ramza, I saw you come off. Let me make a quick comment and then I'll pop over to you. Anna, you saved me from going completely off script because I was going to ask about technology, right? Because if there is this desire to be in person, but there's also an equal desire for flexibility, you've got to have technology and those tools to enable that coordination. Because you look, and I also think that it is a desire across generations for that human connection, right? I crave, we're still closed. I pop into construction trailers just to see the teams and Tysons, you know, I'm like, I'm here. And they're like, oh, here she is again. But, you know, it is, that spans generations, but how do we have the tools that then support both flexibility person, kind of the human connection? Ramza.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, yeah, the technology piece, you know, is a piece of, you know, it's an object in a way when you're looking at it. And in the space itself, for me, I have to hear that. And I'm like, okay, we need to make sure that these rooms are soundproofed. We need to make sure that there's areas for someone to pop in, because Kelly wants to come into work for downtime and focus. And Anna might have a meeting at 2 o'clock. And if you had an open office, all of a sudden, you know, you have people in headphones or echoes and, you know, a lot of these things happening, whereas like someone in their home by this point has created a little bit of a controlled environment. And so when architecturally, I mean, ideally, we're going to be able to, you know, the two biggest challenges at times are still temperature and sound within a space.
Right.
And so I think the technology piece has gone so far ahead that we're trying to still figure out how it's going to fit into the built system. And I think what the evolution of the workspace is allowing now is that experimentation of what's going to work for different people. You know, so I do think that we're on the right track with it, with, you know, all of this coming together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for layering in kind of that. How do you build to support that? You know, I mean, I think essentially what I'm hearing, right, is that virtual is built for efficiency, right? Like you're on a Zoom call, you're moving through calls and Zoom calls throughout the day, and there's no time for the chit chat or, hey, I've got 15 minutes, let's go grab a cup of coffee, or hey, let's walk around outside just to get some fresh air. And so, you know, how do we strike that balance for efficiency and kind of humanity? Well, you know, I think the conversation's kind of naturally lending it. Let's kind of keep moving forward. You know, we've heard a lot here about this idea of work-life integration. I think probably for a good, you know, Ramza, I think you said we're living at work during this while we've been working at home, or I like to call it a work-life collision. But as we think about that, what do you guys what are your perspectives on what this looks like, living and working, or urban versus suburban, or commuting versus, you know, living or moving all over the world to be able to do this work? James, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it, you know, it depends on a lot of factors, obviously. I think that's a big caveat in all of this, right? It depends on the type of work and the you know, the type of space that a person is in. But, you know, for the typical office worker, you know, I think it really depends on what's going on in that person's life and making sure that we as organizations are supporting our employees. You know, I think a lot about, you know, being, you know, at my age, I'm 29. So we're kind of in this in between of, you know, we're still young. We still want to be in a city with our friends and, you know, going out and things like that. But also people are getting married, they're having kids, they're starting to settle down. And so finding that balance, you know, that work can work with them as they transition in their life is really key. Absolutely loves commuting. I think some people find some time to turn their brain off during it, so that's good, I guess. But I think that having that flexibility and that ability to be in and around a major hub, you know, for the networking, for the everyone getting together, but also being able to support, you know, those folks that want to be further out, that want to have a little more space, a little more breathing room. I'm currently in a 700 square foot apartment, so I'm not a great example of that. But you know, finding a way to work with both kinds of people and or not both, really all kinds of people, because you know those things can change. It can be multiple things at once. You know, finding ways to do that is what's going to be key. And you know, looking at what the coming generations are going to want. I feel like they're probably going to follow the same trend as most of the others, where, you know, Gen Z is coming up, they're graduating college they want to be in the city, they want to go out with their friends, and then they're going to get old too, right? And it will just keep happening. I think that'll probably continue to a certain extent. But that's why, as long as we can find a way to create that hub, right? Create that place that everyone can come, that everyone will be at, be it part-time, sometimes all the time, so that they can come and continue to grow with their organizations, and the organizations can grow around them. I think that's really key.
Yeah, thanks, James. Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I think James hit on some really good points. It's largely going to be trying to find this balance between work and play in the environments that we're living in, right? We want to be able to work there, but then after work, we want to be able to say, well, I want to step away, meet my friends for a quick drink, or go to a Nats baseball game. You want to have more to do, especially if you're commuting into the city. I would also say, though, you're seeing that similar. So as a DMV native, I'm born and raised in this whole area. I can tell you the amount of change I've seen in this city, even in the past 15 years, is just remarkable. How neighborhoods have become significantly more walkable, and how easy it is to access different areas of the city. But as well, from a more suburban perspective, you're almost seeing like smaller micro cities popping up, and how those are as well getting urbanized. And you're seeing this ability to have work and play balanced in those same spaces. Like I am in an area in North Bethesda, which formerly used to be called Rockville, and now it's fancy in North Bethesda. But what you see here is you see all these pop up of high rises, you see retail and restaurants, so that you can go out and have a good time. But then at the same time, I found it amazingly interesting that there's a Regis co-working space there. So you can easily step away and do work, but now work is done, and I can go to the dog park and grab a beer while my dog plays, and I let him out from my apartment that's 20 meters away. So I think you're going to continue to see just the whole area kind of redeveloping, so that we can find this balance between, even if you aren't able to necessarily afford the hefty prices of living directly in Washington, D.C., I think you're going to start to see more and more of that become building up, so that you still have that same balance in a more suburban area as living directly downtown.
No, absolutely. Well, kind of with those perspectives, then, how do you think that changes our industry, right? So if you've got kind of these live work play centers, and people are choosing to be there, and then maybe the co-working space is the solution for some sort of office space, how does that play into the previous kind of perspective that we want to come together to collaborate and to build the community with our coworkers? What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Rams.
I was going to say, I'm like, so what it comes down to is, we've used, James mentioned we're creating a hub, and Kelly is defining what a transit-oriented development is. And that's what, I think that they're, from an urbanization point of view, what that does is it really does link, the office and work to more of a walkable destination, rather than, using vehicles, using cars, making that, having to deal with a lot of that. And I think that was something we did see this past year during COVID. It was like, how do you get to work? Did you have an elevator, use storefront, the retail spaces that had indoor versus outdoor seating. And so, what we realized was, again, I feel like that accelerated that urbanization and accelerated the need for transit-oriented developments, where when you're going to have growth in Washington, D.C., for example, the number of people that are going to be increasing in the next decade coming in here is why, we're seeing an increase in multifamily right now. We're seeing, a change happening. And I mean, on a personal level, what I'm noticing is it was almost like this past year was like a can where it shook and people are moving to different places. I got people, who are now more moving to New York that had been in DC forever, and people in San Francisco moving to DC. There's just a little bit of a shake happening when you think about Gen Z and the generation after that's going to be coming forward, right? And thinking about what their, go-tos have been. How do they rely on transportation? How do they rely on these things? Well, walkability has changed too. I take meetings in heels on a Lime scooter. Right? Like if I'm on K Street and I'm like, well, I don't want to necessarily walk, but I don't want to drive. And so that's now changed what walkability is. And I think, looking at a place like DC, which is hub, because we have government, we have technology, we now have biotech coming in, we have multifamily growing to this level. We've got, everything that's going to come with Amazon, and then Virginia Tech. And this is only a handful of the changes coming in. And so I do think that there's going to be a little bit of a shift. And I think with infrastructure and from an operational point of view, we are going to have to make sure that these things can work hand in hand together, so that whether it's updates to the trains, whether it's, the things that we need operationally to keep up with the technology and to keep up with these hubs that are being created and these zones that are being created, and how we can work not just collaboratively within our office, but also outside of our office. When we think of campus, there's multifamily and retail link differently. How does retail and office link differently? Can these sectors help each other a little bit more? When you look at 14th Street right now, it is a retail multifamily office zone where you don't know what's going to be above the restaurant you're going to. And so, it allows for that. And I feel like the incoming generation is about that. They're about that movement and that change and experiencing, it grows that relationship a little bit more, and in different ways.
Yeah, no, it introduces a new level of choice, right? And that for these newer generations, for you all, for this next generation coming in, it's that becomes table stakes, right? Of an expectation, it sounds like, and Kelly, I really liked what you said, right? That you almost bundle activities when you do come in. So I am as cliched as you can get, started in the city, and I am now out in the country. So when I head in, right, what am I tethering to that commute and that event? So no, I think it's a great way of thinking of the dynamics have changed, but you can still make it all work. James, were you going to say something? I know.
I was just going to mention one thing that Kelly mentioned, and Ramza kind of hit on it too. When Kelly talks about North Bethesda, it made me think about kind of the general area where I work, which is out in Falls Church. And, for the first 5 years when I was, here, obviously there was retail, there were offices, Falls Church, but that's an interesting neighborhood. Really, you're starting to see kind of transform, especially West Falls Church. The Mosaic District, I think, is a really excellent example of just this kind of weird little micro city that popped up out of nowhere. But you know what? It's got all the restaurants that I have right here in Mount Vernon Triangle and Logan Circle and all that. And it's got bigger apartments with people that have more space, and they have more outdoor space. There's more green space for the dogs that they now have, the kids that they now have, and people my age. So I'm kind of who I'm hitting on there. And so seeing that kind of happen in step with all of the office space that's already out there, right? Minimizing that commute time, making that connection easier. I think you're going to see that continue to grow, not only on the outskirts of DC, but I would believe that you're going to see that throughout the country, especially in these cities that are really starting to take off now in the last few years.
Yeah, no, great perspectives. And I think it sets us up nicely as kind of unpacking a little bit more around just this ever expanding world and how accessibility is kind of the key, right? Or the name of the game. And so how do we create relationships with our coworkers or our bosses or, direct reports, our teams who may not be in the same physical space? Ramza, you want to get us started on this one?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this has a lot to just do with the psychology. When we talk about culture and we say we're struggling with the culture right now, what do we do? My first question is, what was your culture before? And let's really analyze what it was before. I feel like there's been a lot of identity crisis that whether, people are trying to figure out what that culture is. What does that mean? What is collaboration, right? These are terms that we use, but we don't always have the same definition for in the room. And so the first thing really is to define what that is to you. Right? Is collaboration like, hey, two of us want to go into a meeting, or is collaboration we have 8 people in the room that need to get factored in here? And so when it comes to using all of those things and really expanding on that culture, I think one of the challenges is linking the space and the people when you're not always going to physically be there, right? How do you do that? And I again, not one answer that fits all, because a law firm, for example, is going to have very, very different needs of what their culture needs to be. They might say, okay, we need a bit of an amenity space so that we can have our attorneys and our juniors link with each other a little bit more versus a different type of space. And so I think being able to define that is step one. And there is a creativity about creating culture with technology in play, right? I mean, with us, we've been able to use technology in a positive way. That is like we have a group chat on Teams that we use similar to group chat that you would, this is like, don't need to send an email. There's going to be like GIFs in there. There's going to be articles in there. And we have one or two people who help facilitate the conversation within that, right? So that everyone feels like, I've actually kind of told senior leadership, like, don't necessarily talk in this one, let everyone else do it. You observe so that everyone feels safe and they feel like they can still be themselves and have that. And then that allows room for professional growth, right? Like, I know that like our company is new to DC. And so I'm kind of like, let everyone have their first year of getting in and getting comfortable and being trained. Training has been very difficult in this time, right? And so we've needed a little bit more structure and routine. We've had to build a lot of trust. I think that was a huge, huge, huge factor for us, is if you do not have trust and if you just go and enforce something, you know what, they might listen, but you're going to have a tough time retaining. And so building that trust is going to allow that. So, we'll have, hey, what they like right now, for example, we're working with around 2 to 3 days a week. Let's try for 3. And in the beginning of the week, we, whoever's manager is, they know what day their staff is going to be in the office. And if there's been a day that we're like, hey, can we all come in this day? Great. On the other side, we're scheduling things like Top Golf, right? So that we do have an in-person thing Monday, Wednesday, and the other person comes in Tuesday, Thursday. So we're finding ways of linking each other, but then also just building an entire thing of trust overall.
Yeah, thanks for that. James, what do you think?
Yeah, Ramza just made a really good point about trust. Something that kind of outside the built environment, but just in general from a team standpoint, I found that investing in the growth of the people around you is really important. Obviously that lends itself from a leadership standpoint of those that work for you, those that are subordinates of you or whatever. Investing in their success is usually a really great way to create that that culture and that environment of trust and of again, success going forward. But even from the other direction, right? Finding ways to get on the same level in person, as I've mentioned before, or even if not, if it's not possible, right? I know plenty of people who their boss sits on the other side of the country, right? But finding ways to connect with them regularly, often, and openly, I think is key. Obviously, in any kind of power dynamic relationship, it's important that the person, the higher up person, if you will, kind of extend that olive branch, kind of lead that charge. But even right on the other side of things, creating a way to just foster that relationship and be trusting of each other really helps create that relationship going forward. And that's why when you look at the built environment, it is absolutely possible to do without being in person. But it's those little micro interactions that happen in person that can really drive it. Just at, as a weird example, being here in DC, I'm from New York, and by chance, my boss and I are both big New York Mets fans, right? So we still find a way to talk about them and commiserate about them, all the time, just because it's something that has really grown our relationship from the start. And it's tougher online, right? It's like, oh, we'll get on a Zoom call and, oh yeah, did you catch that? Whereas like, if I'm sitting at my desk and he walks in and he's like, oh, blew it again last night. And even just something like that can really, really shape a relationship, or help shape a relationship at least. And so finding ways to continue to do those sorts of things, I think, is really key. And so whether it's structured, like we're all going to Top Golf, which Ramza, I'd love to come to Top Golf, or it's just the little stuff like that, just finding ways to just humanize the work experience, I think, is essential.
Yeah, no, I mean, and they're great perspectives, right? Of thinking that it's some things that I heard as takeaways, right? That one, the expectation of finding common ground, because then from that, those commonalities starts to create trust. And then also, I think it's important for bosses, and as you all may lead teams doing today, right, that you're creating the space for relationships you've built, and essentially kind of how do you create equity of experience regardless of where people are, geographically, at home, in the office space, traveling, or anywhere in between. Let's, golly, this is a great conversation and the time is flying by. Let's take a slightly different twist here. So there is a perception of the newer generations in the workplace that they typically remain with companies for a shorter period of time. What makes you stay with a company or want to stay with a company? Kelly, Kelly. Wow, that was just a flatline brainwave right there. So Kelly.
Honestly, I would say a huge piece of it, as James was touching on, was and Ramza as well, is training and development. You want to feel invested in as an employee. Also, connections and relationships. I think that's a huge piece. I mean, there's what I would say an age-old saying of people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses, right? So, if you're able to establish just a genuine working connection and personal connection as well, too, which I think a lot of people have grown over this last year. I mean, my boss for the last 3 years sits in Connecticut and I sit here in Washington, D.C. and we start, our weekly one-on-one meetings with a 10-minute debrief of what's just going on in our life, good and bad, fun and indifferent, to help establish those connections. So, between his constant support of my growth and development as a professional and him almost being like my biggest cheerleader, he's really taught me to be an advocate for myself so that I feel supported, and then he supports me as an advocate. Also, aligning with your organization's overall culture and goals and missions, even work they're doing outside of the workplace, that can touch on various social initiatives that are going on in the larger world around us. How does your organization change, adapt, and grow with those changes?
Yeah, no, those are great nuggets of things to be aware, right? To retain, right? We started that this whole thing is how do you recruit the newer generations and retain them? And that sounds like that's paramount to create that type of environment. Anna, what are your thoughts?
I think Kelly really hit the nail on the head. She said a lot of things that I would echo. And then when I think about this question, growth is so important, right? And it's not some big mystery. I think, what motivates people to stay with companies. I think if you invest in your employees and in their growth, you're going to have, you're going to reap dividends from keeping good people with your company. And I think the, social responsibility aspect, kind of bringing it back full circle to the comments around sustainability and accessibility, these are really important to the younger generations. And so having a company that they feel confident their personal values, and especially with what's going on in the world as of late, I think that's having more importance potentially than it was before, and something that I think companies should take note of when they're promoting these values and their goals as an institution, and really walking the walk and not just talking the talk, and ensuring that that does reflect what the employees feel as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because if we're all over the place, or we want more flexibility, and these things are really important to build loyalty, the intentionality exponentially grows to be able to achieve that, to retain, rockstar talent such as yourselves. James, I think you had come off mute. Did you have some additional thoughts to jump in on?
Yeah, real fast, the idea of culture is so paramount to why someone would want to stay somewhere. I think that part of that culture, I think, is just believing in what you're doing, and I think I believe that belief comes from the top, right? So when you have a team where everyone's kind of bought in together on achieving goals, working together, growing together, bettering the entire team or the entire company, or both preferably, right, is so paramount to, wanting to stay with that group, right? Wanting to see it through, wanting to continue, growing. I think that's just essential. And it really does come from the top down. When you have a leader on your team, or a leader at your company, or again, preferably both, who really inspire the rest of the organization to achieve something great together. That's what I think gets a lot of buy-in, right? The whole idea of, if you want to go somewhere fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a team or whatever that saying is. It's the same idea, right? When everyone's bought in, you can really achieve amazing things. And so getting that buy-in early from everybody, I think really makes people want to stay. And I think especially for millennials who and Gen Z, whoever it is, who are kind of ready to jump to the next thing or try something else or whatever. Knowing what they're going to lose by leaving, I think is really essential. And it's not always perfect. People will leave, and that's okay. That's normal. And sometimes they need to for their own growth. But it is something that that can create that culture. Getting that buy-in.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to think about, right? And it gives me a lot to think about, right? Just even for the teams and what kind of environment is being, what are we fostering? So, Ramza, any kind of a quick thought or two that you may want to add?
Yeah, for sure. So I think in a nutshell, why people will, this is really beyond just generational. I think it comes down to values, ethics, and professional growth that works in synergy with personal growth, whatever that might be for you.
Yeah.
I think Gen Z, that's coming in, millennials we're kind of the in-between, where we knew what a floppy disk was and we understand iOS. And so it's kind of like the Gen X prepared millennials, and now millennials are trying to prepare Gen Z, and then Gen Z will prepare Alpha, right? So what I've noticed is Gen Z, like, they're not here to mess around. They're stubborn. So we're trying to kind of create that whole thing, which is, I think, really everything that we just discussed in a nutshell all together. And that is what preparing for the next workspace is. It's every single points that, James and Kelly and Anna all, discussed. And so, yeah, I think, but values, ethics, and that social awareness is really, really important right now. People want to make sure that, when it comes to diversity and inclusion and all of these things, that we are aware of what's happening around us and what's taking place around us in regards to that.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic. Well, I want to carve off a few minutes for Q&A. I mean, thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. And I think we've really heard from you all as the experts some really kind of sage wisdom of what is expected, for the workplace, for the digital tools, for the culture, the environment, an inclusive approach, and kind of this holistic approach for what these new generations need. We'll turn it over and start with Q&A. And I think I may have, well, we're waiting for him to come in. I just got one question, so I'll throw it out there and whoever wants to take a stab. So building on the idea of staying with a company, what amenities or perks would make you want to stay at a company in addition to culture, values, social awareness? Kind of some other tangible aspects.
I know I've had friends who have unlimited vacation and that's been interesting to see how that dynamic has worked, and how, it turns out not everyone even uses the full time of vacation. So that's just something that I think is new. I haven't had it before, but I know other people have. And so that's kind of one thing that I would say that's not an amenity per se, but something that's changing.
I think if you end up in a building that has, or you create, a space that has things like a gym or outdoor space. I know those are kind of cliche answers, but especially a gym, right? Gym memberships are expensive, and if you're a casual gym goer or you're not going to, specific classes here or there, and you just kind of want to get on the treadmill and lift some weights from time to time, or even regularly, but it's as simple as that. Not draining $50 a month is huge. So that sort of thing is certainly helpful for anybody. In my opinion, at least.
Oh, those are great. Anna.
Yeah, I think the intangibles than the tangibles personally. So I saw there was a question, would you rather have good training and development or free food? And I think for me, I'm kind of one of those, teach someone to fish rather than give them a fish. So I would rather invest in some of those long-term things and have a company that values that and invests in growth and employee wellness. And like I said, some of those more intangible aspects. And I think there's kind of this conception that you need to have, flashy amenities and all of these things to draw in talent. And I think with this whole conversation on the hybrid work model and people saying, I do want to work from home part of the time, it's really de-emphasizing the importance of having some of these kind of flashy amenities and spaces. And it's really bringing it back to the basics of, why people stay with a company. And I think for a lot of us, it really is that growth and intangible things that you might not be able to find at a competitor at a different company.
Yeah, no. So it really is both, right? So another question, just along that same vein, if you had to choose one amenity that's kind of your deal breaker, if you're, where you are, or you're looking for a job, or the generations, like what would that one amenity be? Like if you had kind of the silver bullet of amenities, what would be kind of one that you're like, God, this is a deal breaker for me?
That's a tough one.
Slow internet.
What'd you say, Ramsey?
Slow internet.
Oh yeah. Definitely need good connectivity at all times.
So good IT, architecture, and infrastructure. Okay. No small task.
No. And there's also other things where, like, I putting into perspective, like, I don't have children, but I know that there's the concepts like daycares, mother's rooms, wellness rooms, those things. I do think those things are nice, and I might not know the answer to this because I might not have yet experienced one of those amenities that's been, oh my gosh, but I know that having, I've been eating my lunch in our building's like rooftop, and I don't know that I want to ever go back to not eating my lunch up there. So I think just having like a little bit of a, a place to just go and recalibrate for a second for me is one of the things I've loved having in my workspace. So I don't know, that's one that I can confidently say, but I don't know if there's a deal breaker per se.
No, that's fair. Right. Maybe it's super important. Kelly, Anna, I think you guys both came off mute.
Yeah, I mean, I think my top absolute important item is that you have to have training and development budget available. Don't just tell me it's there and then it doesn't actually exist, because training and development and growth is of the utmost importance to me. As well as, I would say, financial futures. Again, these are mostly non-tangible type items.
Yeah.
Right? People think that they need to draw people in with decks and all these amazing design spaces. Those are all nice, but I think it does boil back down to some of the core offerings of benefits that an organization is willing to offer. So like I said, the most important is definitely the training and development. If the adequate budget isn't there to support that, I would honestly not be very interested in moving forward with the company. And then I would also say, how is this organization helping support my financial future in the future? So making sure that you are actually offering very good retirement packages. That's very important to me as well too. The cost of living inflating, it's hard enough to save. So making sure that an organization has a plan that supports my financial future as well, and savings goals for that is important. I mean, someone was touching on food. I will say food is important. My organization offers free lunch. And that has been so missed this last year, the ability to go get my free chopped salad every day. And just to not have to think about like what you're making every single day.
Yeah, so you're making it really easy on us. Free gym memberships, free food, because this ultimately supports your financial future, right?
That's right.
For savings. Anna, do you have any thoughts? And then we've got some more questions that have come in.
Yeah, just really quick. I don't know if this is technically an amenity, but I think access to public transportation is one that's really big for me.
Right.
And so I think geolocation in that sense.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think it ties nicely to talking about, right, these live workplace centers that a lot of the newer generations are gravitating towards. And so how do you support that if your office space is not necessarily in that vicinity? So no, thanks. I think these are all fantastic tips. So here's a great question. Should we be concerned that new talent or top talent wants a choice on their physical geolocation, whether it's, near or far from a company location? And so I guess, would you see, is remote work kind of that expectation, or a new kind of tangible benefit?
I think it depends on who's doing what and where. If and having an open dialogue about that, right? If you have a candidate who lives on the other side of the country and wants to stay there, but they've got everything that they can continue to operate or can begin to operate well with that team, you have faith that they have that personality and that ability, then I don't see that as a concern. And again, I see that really just part of that flexibility, right? Are they willing to come out, a couple times a year, however often you need them to, within reason, of course, to attend meetings and meet the team and spend some time with people. Or if that's, not necessary, of course, that's something to consider as well. But, just making sure that person has that flexibility as well. I don't see that as necessarily a concern, because again, I think the great caveat to all this is that every person is different and every, culture is going to be a little different too. So if somebody's willing to do that and that's their version of flexibility, if it works for you.
And I would just add, I mean, I don't really see it as a concern so much as an opportunity. I mean, think about how much wider of a net you can cast with a talent pool if you're opening roles up to remote working, right? So you can tap into other geographic locations that maybe were limits before. So I think it could be a huge opportunity for hiring managers at companies if you're willing to make that flexible option.
So if you make the flexible option and you open that up, is there an expectation to then have a physical presence in those markets, kind of in a hub idea, or are you okay not having a physical location to go in for kind of the social connections we talked about earlier?
James, go ahead.
I think it depends on the size of the company and kind of what resources they have at their availability, right? If it's a small company, it's probably not that easy to just, we'll open up a San Francisco office, whatever. So I think it really depends. And really how many people you have there, even as a large organization, if you have one person and, who's really, really great in Anchorage, well, that's great. I don't know if we need to spend the money on a whole office for you in Anchorage, right?
Right.
So it's certainly something to think about, but, that's, with technology, of course, but even with transportation, right? I think with the transportation availability we have in this country, what's a flight really at the end of the day? Come on down from time to time.
So as long as folks can get to a space that brings teams together, that would be okay. Ramza, do you have a quick thought?
Steph, I was going to say, you brought up a good point though, right? Like the presence. And it's actually a lot easier to have presence now than it was before, due to things like co-working, due to things like memberships, to have an address somewhere, if what you want is presence. In terms of the productivity though, that's really where the physical office space comes in, and what your brand is too. If you're a nonprofit and you're going to have a lot of guests coming in, for example, then you're going to want a nice space with a nice conference room. So yeah, I think, having that, but I do think that we have a lot more options, which is always nice. And that's also, we didn't get too into this, but that the lease timings change for that, right? So are you someone who right now wants the flexibility of having a 3 to 6 month lease in just a workstation, or are you going to be doing a 10 plus 5 year lease somewhere else? And that's going to affect how the future of your organization kind of goes, and it influences the decisions that you make design wise heavily, very heavily.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've heard about it from you all today, that this idea of flexibility and how that will just naturally, still the power of the built office space, but the dynamics around that from all different dimensions of our industry absolutely will adapt and evolve as this is too. One more question, just kind of based on time. I'm sure we could probably continue on forever, but right, do you is the desire for the newer generations to have like defined flexible schedules that like everyone's in the same 3 days, or that it's just truly up to your choice and then you own the coordination?
So we're doing a mix. We have kind of we go by a weekly thing right now because that's what currently is just the situation. We're hoping this organically turns into a routine, and so having like 2 days where you kind of know, like, okay, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm gonna be here is kind of like office hours, and then I'll have one optional day. So that might be a Monday, that might be a Wednesday, that might be a Thursday within that. And if anyone has a reason for why they need something different, we've just asked them to come and like personally talk to one of their managers, and we'll figure that out, right? So there's people who have like their kids' schedules a different day, so it's like we're trying to work along with everyone in order to get the highest productivity level. We've asked people what are you coming to the office for, and where are you the most productive? So I have an idea of kind of like who my morning people are versus who my like other people are, like, and just things like that. So it has been a lot more conversation. So yeah, I think that's a good question, because flexibility really does come down to that mix of where you have choice.
Yep. So it's really a blend of both, a blend of prescriptive flexibility and open flexibility, essentially.
Mhm.
Well, we are at time, and I know there's a few questions we didn't get to, so happy to follow up offline for anyone that maybe didn't get your question answered specifically. But thank you. Thanks, James, Anna, Kelly, Rumza. This was, I learned so much, and hopefully others did as well, just kind of really to get a new, fresh perspective of what we're planning and solving for as we go forward. So thanks so much. And thanks everybody for your time this morning.
Thank you,
Thank
Steph.
you.